Welcome and hello. This is a video lesson in FHWA Hydraulic Toolbox. And in this lesson, we're going to be talking about the plot properties. All right, so what I have on the screen here is a cross-section plot. This is just one of many different plots in the FHWA Hydraulic Toolbox. So for instance, if you've got a channel analysis, open that up and then click on plot. This is where I saw that plot. There's also a plot from the compute curves. So this is just one calculator, the channel calculator, but if you use other calculators, there's also other plots. What I'm going to be talking about in this lesson is the plots in general, the plot properties that are consistent for all of the plots. So let's just go ahead and get started, and then you'll see what this lesson is all about. All right, so to access the plot properties, what you're going to want to do, it says right up here, double click for the plot options. Double click in plot for options, same thing. So just double click with your left mouse button and then boom, here is the dialog box where we can edit the plot properties is what I'm calling it. All right. So across the top, we have the different tabs. There's general, plot, axis, font, color, and style. Let's go ahead and just work our way through left to right. And before we do this, I also wanted to mention that you can, open and close. Cancel will close that dialog box. And zooming in and zooming out and panning left and right are also topics I want to cover in this video. So to zoom in, what you want to do is just take your left mouse and drag a outer bounding rectangle to what you want to see in the next zoom. And then we can do that again. Say I'm going to focus right here on the left part of the water surface elevation within this channel. So that is how to zoom in. How to zoom out is still a mystery to me. So what I've been doing is just opening and closing the plot. If there is a way to zoom out, and I figure that out after this recording, I will let you know in the video description. All right, or go ahead and leave a comment if you know how to do that. As far as panning, you can well, first of all, you have to zoom in if you can pan. If you zoomed out to the full extent, there's no reason to pan. You can use the vertical and horizontal scroll bars to pan up and down and left and right. And another way to pan left and right is to do a single click to select the plot and then hold down the control key and then just wheel down to pan right and then wheel back up to pan left. Again, I'm holding down the control key. All right, so let's go ahead and get started with the plot properties here. I'm going to open this up once again to the full view and double click to open up the properties. Here on the first tab, this is the general tab. We can edit what it says here for the plot title and subtitle. Currently, there's no subtitle. It's just a title. What I may want to add to the title is this location of the cross section. So whenever I make a change in the plot properties, go ahead and click apply, and that will update the plot so we can see that the change has been made. Say, for instance, I want that river stationing to be down here in the subtitle, and then up here in the title, I could just call it River A, and then click apply. Boom. So that updates the title and the subtitle. All right, so below that we have border style. So right now it's shadow. That's this shadow that's kind of along the border. Not a huge deal. No border, I think, looks bad unless for some other reason you don't want the border. If you're not using a border, that's when you may want to use the grid lines. So apply. Okay. The grid lines is very faint, so we'll just leave them on for now. I'm getting ahead of myself. The line border apply is basically the same as the shadow without the shadow. It's just the line and then 3D inset. Okay. That kind of looks like the opposite of the shadow. So let's just leave it at shadow, apply. Viewing style. I like color the best. That's when we can see the blue line representing the water surface. But monochrome is just all black. And then this is monochrome plus symbols. No difference on this particular plot. Back to color. Font size. This is currently large. This is medium. So it affects the title, subtitle, the axes titles, and the axes numbers. And then this is the small font. So whichever font size you want. I'm going to go back to large though. Numeric precision over here, this is the precision of the numbers that we're seeing. So for instance, we have 1 decimal place over here for elevation and 0 decimal places here for stationing in this cross-section plot. And it's currently set to 3, but we don't need 3. In fact, I'm not even sure this works because as we zoom in, it seems to just adjust based on the zoom level, not necessarily what we're seeing in this radio button selection. Let me go ahead and zoom in. and then focus on what it's saying for the numeric precision. So zoom in again, that's 2, and then that's 3, 2 on the stationing. If I zoom in further, okay, so now we have 4 precision decimal places for the elevation and then 3 for the stationing. So yeah, anyway, let me go ahead and reset. In fact, let's bring up the other plot. So if I go compute curves, and if you're curious about how to generate a cross section first, I will leave a link to lesson 3 where I talk about the channel calculator. You'll get a channel analysis dialog box. So I'm kind of skipping over those details here and just using this particular calculator for the plots. All right, so let's bring up a different plot here. Open up the plot properties by double clicking. And that's about it for our general tab. Next is the plot tab. The axes is flow versus depth, so that's fine as it is. The different plot styles here is area, so it's like area under the curve. Bar plot probably is not a good fit for this one. It would be a little bit better if we had more lines. So let me go ahead and regenerate that plot with more points. I'm sorry, points. So instead of 10, I'll make 50. Then I'll open up the plot properties. And then for the plot type, if I click on bar and apply, still looks bad, but not as bad as it was. All right, line is basically the same as we started, points and lines, except without the points. So that's not too bad. Here is points only. We can't see the points very well, but we'll be able to modify the points over here and a little bit later. That was the style tab. Okay, back to the plots tab. Points plus best fit curve, points plus best fit line. Okay, points plus best fit line is terrible because this is not a linear relationship. Points plus spline and then spline alone. The spline is basically an interpolation between the points. So let's just go back to points plus line and click apply. Certain plots will look better with a 3D option. Line is not one of them. So if I click on 3D, it really doesn't look any different. But I think area might be one, or maybe bar. Okay, maybe not. Bar. Okay, let's try that without 3D. There's some sort of edge effect going on here. Next is the axes tab right here. This is where we can set the, hold on a second, I gotta change this back to points plus line. That's driving me nuts. Okay, axes tab, this is where we can specify whether the X or Y axis is linear or log. So in some situations, you may want to use log, such as the grain size distribution is typically using log, or if your data is just distributed in such a way that it makes sense to view that data using a log axis, you can switch it to log. But for this, we're going to stick with linear. And then the extents for the max and min values, the default is set to auto for the range, min and max values. But if you wanted to overwrite that for whatever reason, you could overwrite the minimum, in which case this minimum value for y, which is currently 0, we could set it to -10, click apply, and now it starts at -10. If we wanted to set the max to a specific value, maybe 10 more than the default max, click apply, and now it's up to 62 here, so 10 more than the default of 52. If I wanted to set it to both min and max to customize both values, I can do that as well. And say, for instance, I'm only focused on the depth between 1 and 2, then I could go ahead and say this is 1, or between 1 and 2, 1 and 2, apply. And then I'm sort of zoomed in right here on just that particular range of depths and that particular range of flows. So I could actually zoom in, maybe say 8 to 35, 8, 35, and then apply. Okay, so that zooms me in a little bit more. And of course, I can zoom in just by dragging a rectangle using the left mouse button. All right, so that's it for the axes tab. Font tab is pretty straightforward. Let's go ahead and add a subtitle again. So subtitle, and then apply, and then font. If I wanted to modify the font family, bold, italic, and underline for the main title, subtitle, and the subset data like points and axes label, this is the tab you do it in. So let's just go ahead and set the subtitle to Arial, and we'll make that bold. We'll say the main title is underline, and then the axis labels are italics. So I'll click apply, and then all of those changes have been made. All right, next tab over is color. This is where you can specify the different colors of this plot. So the radio button over here on the left is what you're going to color, and then the color picker on the right is what color it will be. Desk foreground is the way it describes the font color. So desk foreground is font color if we made that green, and that looks bad, but that's how to change it. Let's make it dark green. Okay, not as bad. Desk background, this is the background color, currently white. So if I change it to blue, that looks really bad. How about gray? That's a little more readable. Shadow color, that is this shadow right here. So not a huge difference, but let's make it red so you can see that change to red. Graph foreground, that is the border of the graph. Let's change that to, how about blue? Yeah, so you can kind of see it blue up here. And then the last one is graph background. That is what is white right here is now this dark bluish green color. Let's just stick with that one right there. Yeah, pretty terrible colors, but I'm just demonstrating what the different options are. If you wanted to use any of the preset colors right here, which would definitely fix what I've already made on the left, then you can just do a single left click. These are preset color schemes. So if you just click one that you like, then you can go with that. This middle column is medium colors, and then the dark color is on the far right column. This is not using bitmap/gradient styles. So if you click this checkbox, you've got some different gradient style options. So go ahead and mess around with that. Ooh, look at that one. Shadow medium with the gradient. Okay, let's stick with that. All right, and then the last tab here is style. And actually, I'm going to switch to the other plot to demonstrate the style tab. So let's cancel that, close, plot. Here's our cross-section plot now. Let's make this a little larger, double click, and then the style tab is right here. We have two different series of data that we're plotting. There's channel, which is the ground elevation, that's the black line, and then water surface is the blue line right here. So if I wanted this water surface to be a thicker line, I could just modify it, and now it's a thicker line. Same with channel. If I wanted it to be thicker or thin or maybe dashed. So here's a dashed line. As for the points, let's see here. Let's click on channel. It's currently a circle. I'm not sure where the points are. In fact, they may not actually be here, but if you had a series of data that had data points instead of just a line, you would also go ahead and modify the points using this point type dropdown. All right, so that's pretty much it for the 6 tabs that you can use to customize the plot properties. One more thing before we finish up is these 2 buttons here, export and maximize. Maximize will quite simply maximize the plot in your window, and then you can just double click on the plot frame to minimize. You can also maximize using this button or just to double click on the plot frame. Okay, so let me bring that back. And then the other button in the bottom right corner is export. This is how you export your plot. There's a lot of different options here, so we'll go through them briefly. First, there's the file format, EMF, WMF, BMP, JPG, and PNG. So make the selection that you want. I'll select BMP. And then the export destination, your options are on your clipboard, into a file, or to your printer. Let me go ahead and demonstrate this one. I'll go BMP file, and then I'm going to navigate to the directory that I want to save this image to. So the desktop is where it is. That's good. I'll just call it plot1 and then click on save. I also need to set the export size. So this is a fairly small size in pixels. Export over here is the button that's actually going to generate the image. So let's go with a width of, how about 600 pixels wide by 400 pixels tall, and then export. Okay. So here is my image. Here is the natural size right here, I believe. See, yes, right there. So 600 by 400, that came out all right with all of the properties that I defined. Let's do one more example. So double click and move this over, export. Oops, okay. Now let's export it as a JPG. And then actually that won't matter because what I'm going to do is print to my printer. Let's go with full page, and then I'm going to print it to a PDF file. So if you have a PDF driver installed on your computer, this is the list of printer drivers. I'll just click on my PDF generator, and you've got a few other options here. So just go ahead and select your options, click OK, and then it will generate the PDF. I'll call this plot2.pdf. And then that should show up on my desktop. There it is. Okay. And then I'm going to zoom out. Here is the full page extents. I could have made it smaller, but I went in a full page, and it has all the same properties that I defined when making those edits in my property box. All right, well, that is the lesson on the FHWA hydraulic toolbox, specifically covering plot properties.